1981, believing God had called us. Cheryl and I were married. We headed off to Toccoa, and I got to Bible school. And by that time, I'd probably read the Bible sort of all the way through. You know, there's a lot of stuff you skipped in the Old Testament. That's where I was at that point in my walk and my journey, and it was going on. And I got to Bible school, and they force you to read it through all the way, and you're taking these great courses in it. And I realized every time I went through it, how much more I saw, what I didn't realize it was there. I learned over the years that there's all sorts of things that we assume we have some understanding of, but we actually don't. If I were to quiz everybody today, here's a little sheet of paper. Give me 5 things that you know about Titus, not the book, the man. We'd all sit there and go, who? What? What? We just don't know things like that. Or if I would say things like this, Titus was going to Crete. Why did Paul send him there? Yeah. And you'd all answer, go ask Nigel. We'd do something like that. We just wouldn't know. So I always like at the beginning of a sermon series that I want to tie it together. I want to help us understand some of the main characters, some of the purpose, the background. A lot of times I call it an introduction. But Titus, the book of Titus, which is only 3 chapters long, the book of Titus, which only has 46 verses in it total. 46 verses total. That's longer than most of the chapters that we look at in the Gospel of Mark on Monday nights. In those 46 verses, Paul thought he wrote enough to Titus to change an entire region in Macedonia. It's a powerful book. It's huge in what he said to do, but a lot of times we don't even understand how significant it is because we don't have all the things on it. But personally, I am totally convinced that the book of Titus is a book that helps us create change in a culture of confusion. And I want to unpack that with us today as we're going to kind of go into this. So this is kind of like Understanding Titus, the beginning point, and I want us to go there. So you can follow along on some things that I'm going to take place on the screen. There's going to be a lot of background stuff, and I hope this is not going to do this to me all day. Okay. All right, so first of all, let's put a date on this. This is how soon this occurred. It's written in about AD 66. That means it's written within probably 30 to 33 years of the time of Jesus' death. This is really soon. So Jesus has only been gone. But by now, disciples are now, most of them in their late 50s, 60s, or possibly even pushing 70. Churches are going to them, what are we going to do when you're gone? Because they've been totally dependent upon just a handful of leaders. They've been totally dependent upon just certain individuals to carry the load. And now they're wondering what's going to happen. So Titus is one of those individuals that's going to get tapped for leadership. Titus was actually a Greek follower of Jesus for years, a trusted co-worker, a travel companion of Paul. We're going to unpack more of this. Titus had helped Paul with crisis situations in the past, and going to Crete, it's going to be a major challenge. No, I would rather say it this way. The toughest thing Titus will ever do is say yes to Paul. Okay, I'll go to Crete. Okay, I'll go to Crete. I'll do it. It is the toughest thing that Titus will ever take on. It's huge. And let me just kind of unpack some other things with us as we go through it and we look at it. Okay, thank you. I'm really struggling with the remote today. I'm not quite sure what's up, so they may have to help me in the back. But here's what Titus, I think the book is going to help us do. It's going to help us understanding Titus, these challenges that he faced. They become a model for church leadership, not just in our church, but for every church in existence. And so let me help you understand who this Titus guy is as we go through it. First, do you know that Titus is mentioned in the book of Galatians? He is. And in the book of Galatians, Paul talks to him a little bit, and I want to read it to you. It says in Galatians chapter 2, verses 1 to 3, he said this, now after 14 years, he's talking about his time ministering to the Gentiles. He said, now after 14 years, I went back up again to Jerusalem. This time I took Barnabas with me, this time with Barnabas. And then Titus gets mentioned, and he's almost just simply and also ran. Oh yeah, and I also took Titus. You ever had those conversations where somebody goes, well, who was there? Well, Bob was there, and Joe was there. Oh yeah, Tim was there too. Yeah, it's like the also ran guy. It's the guy. Oh yeah, was it important? Who showed up the workday? And oh, there was Frank and Frank and Frank and Joe and Frank and Joe. Oh yeah, and George showed up too. The also ran. That's Titus's status at this point with Paul. He's kind of with him. But he didn't even deserve top mention. He was kind of like the afterthought. So this time, after 14 years, I decided I needed to go back up and tell the apostles, report everything I'm doing. Took Barnabas with me. Oh yeah, and Titus. And it's just like this. Oh yeah, and Titus came also. So Titus is early in this ministry, and he's in this kind of almost like this also ran state. It says this: I went in response to a revelation, meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders. I presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure that I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. Two huge things come up here. Titus gets mentioned again. He's a Greek through and through. And one of the major things that was happening at this time throughout the region is people were teaching things like this. Joe, if you want to be a follower of Jesus, be a Jew first. Go obey Jewish law, get circumcised, do all these things. And that was going on. And he takes Titus and he says, look, not even Titus. They didn't even look at Titus and say, no, you become a Jew first. No. He's a Greek through and through. And that is significant in realizing everything that's ahead. So in this time period, it's become apparent that Paul has developed some type of a mentoring relationship with Titus. Paul's probably older. We know he's older. We just don't know how old. We know Paul is more experienced. We know Titus is genuine, but he's basically just an also-ran in this ministry time with the apostle. Titus is the direct result of Paul's ministry. This is kind of cool. He brings him because he has been the one that has been ministering to him. He is the one that has seen the growth, so Paul brings him along. Paul had invested in Titus in a way that had produced significant things. Titus became a witness that Paul's ministry was not in vain. And here's the greatest thing. You know what I love about that passage? So, Rich, you want to know how your life in the kingdom is not in vain? There's somebody else that is attached, and they say, there was this guy named Rich, and he really encouraged me. There was this guy named Rich, and he brought me into the kingdom. There was this guy named so-and-so. Our testimony that our race is not in vain is that someone else says we influenced their life. Titus is one of those individuals for Paul. He takes him with him, and it's huge. Hey, Titus, he's one of the men that's really changed. And so here's a great question at the start of this sermon series. The question would be this: who's the person in your life that would be a witness that your service is not in vain? Right now, not 20 years ago, not 2 years ago. Right now in your life, who's the person you're having an impact on? Because that person is the testimony that what you are doing in the kingdom is not in vain. We are called to impact the kingdom by impacting the lives of others. Amen. Amen. So you have this very significant time that's there. Okay, let me go back here. So now, the Apostle Paul, in the late winter of 56 AD, was living in Ephesus. If you remember last week, I shared that it's the longest place he ever lived in one spot. So he stayed in Ephesus a long time. One of the things that while he did was in Ephesus is he wrote 1 Corinthians, because the Corinthian church was really goofed up. Ephesus church becomes a regional church, doing really well. Paul kept getting reports from the Corinthian church, and they are messed up. I mean, they've got all sorts of sexual issues going on. They've got all sorts of worship issues going on. They've got a bent on the gifts of the Spirit that are all twisted and wrong. And Paul struggles with this, and he will write one of his longest letters. He will write this long letter to the Corinthians. And it is likely that Titus is the person that he eventually says, okay, Titus, go take the letter. Go deliver this to the Corinthian leaders. Go tell them this is the truth. And he gives it to them. Now, why do we think that? Well, in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 18, Paul references it in the second letter to the Corinthians. He said, I urge Titus to go to you. And I sent our brother with him. That brother doesn't get named. He's the also ran now. Titus is the one that gets mentioned as the one that's being sent. Titus has changed. He used to be the also ran. Now he's the one out in front. He's got an also ran with him. Titus did not exploit you, did he? Did he not walk in the same footsteps by the same Spirit? This is huge what Paul is saying here at this point. The letter that is supposed to straighten the Corinthian church out, the teachings that are expected to be delivered, the answers to the questions that will be raised by the letter, the person who's supposed to answer them, is Titus standing there. This is the individual. He's got somebody else with him. But then Paul speaks about him and he says, yeah, and when you see him, don't you see that he walks in the same footsteps by the Holy Spirit that I walk in? Paul reproduced himself in another. That's leadership development. In this church, I probably have poured more time into Joe than anyone else. And my fingerprints are all over him, for better or for worse. So he would say things like this, things like, honest, Joe, you remember some of this? I critiqued your prayers. I critiqued sometimes his language when he preached. I critiqued how he presented his message. We'll go through this. Not because I thought Joe was bad. No, I saw Joe a great leader in development. So I thought my calling, I've got to go ahead and challenge him to become more. And you know what? When I hear Joe speak now and I watch him do things, every once in a while I go, oh, man, that's me. Except he looks better. Yeah, going on here like this. We are called to reproduce our lives in the Spirit in the life of another. It's part of what Paul was doing in Titus, and that becomes very clear in that passage. So Paul, this is years later, because this is in the 2 Corinthian letter that Paul talked about that. But man, Titus went from being the also ran to now at this point, he's the person proven to be faithful and trustworthy in his service. Could you imagine what it would take to hear Paul labors over, the Holy Spirit works on him. Man, that inspired letter, that scroll, that delicate scroll where he has written, and then he hands it. And he's in Ephesus, and he's got to cross Greek islands. He's got to get to Corinth, and he gives it to you. And I can picture something going on. Don't lose this, Nigel. Can't you picture he's going on here? He's entrusting it to him. And Titus is totally faithful at this point and doing it. And actually, that is the concept of what we're supposed to be doing. Titus is demonstrating the same character that was in Paul. He understands what it means to be led by the Spirit, so that when he showed up in Corinth with a letter from Paul, and he said, I need to teach you what Paul is saying on how to fix the church here in Corinth, they listened. Why'd they listen? Because Paul had invested in the development of someone else, and they stood ready. You see, that's what we're called to do. Now, I share all this because you're going to see as we get into this Titus study over the next 5 weeks, Paul instructs Titus to do it again, basically. Some of the same things that he was doing, Paul doing in Titus, Paul will instruct Titus to do in the lives of others. And it goes on. Yeah. I got to thinking about this again this last week. Here's the truth. If we truly believe that Jesus is building his kingdom, if we truly believe that we exist as a church because we have a purpose and a mission to fulfill, then every single person sitting here today who claims this church is theirs should have someone's life that they're impacting. It's true. It's true. It is what we are called to do. Our lives impacting other lives. There's no escaping it. There's no escaping it. We are called to impact others with how we live. Paul has developed Titus that way, and now Titus is out on the front line. But that's not the end of this journey that Paul had with Titus. Paul stays in Titus until probably the summer of 57 AD. And we know that he marks it in 1 Corinthians 16, 18. We know he's there because he mentions the day of Pentecost. That's when he left. He left for Troas, and he left there to meet with Titus to discuss the status of the Corinthian church. And when he got there, I can't even imagine what this was like. I mean, imagine hooking up. You've sent a letter that takes forever to get there. Hey, I'll meet you around so-and-so time in Troas. And he gets there, and no Titus. Waits there a few days. No Titus. No Titus. Well, I'll just pick up my phone, send a quick text, see what happened. What happened? Why are you late? What's going on? What's happening here? Can't do any of that. Finally, Paul leaves Troas, and he moves on to Macedonia. Macedonia is those Greek Isles. That's where it's at. And he begins to visit churches there. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 2:13, it says this, that Paul had no peace of mind because he didn't find his, look how he calls him now, my brother Titus there. So I said goodbye to them, and I went on to Macedonia. In Philippi, Paul will finally meet up with Titus, who informs him about the response to the first letter. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 7, all throughout that it bounces in and out of referring to it. But starting in verse 6, I'll read just a couple verses. But Paul says this, but God who comforts the downcast comforted us by the coming of Titus. And by all this we were encouraged. In addition to our own encouragement, we are especially delighted to see how happy Titus was because his spirit has been refreshed by all of you. The time in Corinth had been productive. Thanks be to God, who put in the heart of Titus the same concern I have for you. For Titus not only welcomed our appeal, but he is coming to you with such enthusiasm and on his own initiative. We are sending along with him the brother who is praised by all the churches for his service in the church. What is more, he was chosen by the churches to accompany him. Accompany us as we carry the offering which we administer in order to honor the Lord himself and to show eagerness to help. We want to avoid any criticism for the way we administer this liberal gift, for we're taking pains to do what is right, not only in the eyes of the Lord, but also in the eyes of men. In addition, we're sending with them our brother, who has also proved to us in many ways that he is zealous, and now even more so because of his great confidence in you. As for Titus, he is my partner and co-worker among you. As for our brothers, they are representatives of the church and an honor to Christ. Paul invested in an individual who at first almost didn't get mentioned and now is mentioned foremost among a group of other people sent there to minister in a leadership capacity. For any church to move forward in the kingdom of God, they must constantly be, investing in the development of others. It's what they have to do. Titus, now called partner and co-worker, capable of handling a church crisis without Paul being there. Churches have got to do this. Churches have to. Even churches that live in places where so many people are gray-haired, they can't just say, well, it's someone else's job. How does someone else walk into a job? Someone else walks them there. We have to invest in the development of others for the sake of the mission. It's always been that case. There is no other way. Titus, this guy that Paul's writing this letter to, the book that we're going to look at, the 46 verses that's going to happen, this is an individual that Paul has hand-mentored for leadership in the task. And he's sending him to this place called Crete. And there's a challenge in Crete. It's a huge challenge in Crete. Titus was faced with this formidable challenge. It's logistical, it's cultural, and it's theological. Really briefly, I want you to understand it and maybe lock these things in your brain because you need to understand it. First of all, there is this massive logistical challenge on the Isle of Crete. It's this huge challenge that's going to be there. You see, because, a lot of us, if you've gone to the Bahamas, maybe on a cruise, you've gone over, you've seen some of the islands down in Key West. Our islands are sandy and pretty level. You notice that, right? The islands in the Mediterranean are not like that. The islands in the Mediterranean are incredibly rocky. This island, surrounded by about 600 miles, actually probably closer to 650 miles of shoreline. This is really difficult to navigate and very difficult to travel on, partially because, not just this is an island, but it's an island with mountains and rough terrain all around it. This is probably not how you pictured the Isle of Crete. That's a road. That's a modern road on the Isle of Crete. That's what it was like to travel. And in a second, I'm going to read you a verse, but Paul said this to him. He said, I want you to go and I want you to target every single city on the island of Crete. He's going to tell them to do the same thing, every single one. He doesn't say there, go to one church. He says, I'm challenging you to do this in every single city on the island of Crete. So it's going to be this great challenge that's there. It's there. It's kind of a beautiful island. There are parts of it that's flat. That's kind of gorgeous. That's a picture that, I'll reveal that in a second. This is another beautiful picture. This is one of some of the ruins that are there. Come on, please work. There it is. And here, I'll let you know who took some of these pictures. Anybody recognize that person? Dave and Mary. Dave and Mary have been there. Dave and Mary saw the Isle of Crete a number of years ago, so they sent me a couple of pictures, and I chose some of them to use in that. My favorite picture you sent me, Dave? This is my favorite picture, the one you sent me. That's the, am I seeing it? It's actually, I have it labeled wrong at the top, and I don't know how I did that. Dave, what is that? Do you remember? That's the Titus church. For some reason, I got it labeled wrong in that slide. But that is the church, named after Titus, who will change the entire region. It's this massive logistical challenge to try to deal with everything that's going to take place on Crete. It's a logistical challenge because it's 650 miles of coastline, mountainous terrain, poor road systems. Roads were not built by Rome there. Rome did not consider Crete to be of enough value to send its workmen there and build Roman roads. Roman roads connected most of the world. Isle of Crete, no. So terrible road system. And because of how the terrain is, the cities where Paul is sending them to are incredibly dispersed. If you read Titus chapter 1, verse 5, this is what he says to them. The reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished, and then read the next phrase, and appoint elders in every town. Every single one of them. Over that mountainous, hilly, twisted terrain. Go fix it. Go fix it. I have no idea what Titus felt when he got told that. Are you sure about that? And he didn't send dozens, he didn't send thousands of people with him. He basically sent them there, and you're going to have to take this on. You'll do it. And it goes there. And it's this huge, huge challenge. And I said it was a logistical challenge, but it's also it's this major cultural challenge that's there. The cultural challenge, what do you mean by a cultural challenge? How people are recognized, how people are associated, the things that they do or don't do that are associated with that, all those go into your kind of like your cultural identity. And there were some really strong cultural identities in Crete. And Paul will refer to some of those cultural identities. I want you to read again the part of that command verse Titus 1:5, put in order what's unfinished. And then he drops down to verse 12 and he says this. This is how one of Crete's own prophets, actually a poet, describes Christians at this time. Liars, evil brutes, lazy gluttons. To be Cretan, that's associated with who you are. Not only that, your own poets, your own public speakers stand before you and say it. Well, we're a bunch of dishonest, we're dishonest folks. We're lazy. We're gluttonous. They've got this terrible reputation. They've got a reputation of not working well together. They've got a reputation of not being trustworthy. They've got a reputation of doing whatever it was that they wanted to do. So he sends them there, and there are serious issues of character among not one church like Corinth, among an entire people group. There are issues of character, and there are issues of perseverance. Because again, Paul says, Titus, I don't want you to go and fix one church like I sent you to do in Corinth. Go fix a nation. Fix a nation. Straighten it out. This huge, unreal cultural challenge that would be there. And that would be just overwhelming. I can't imagine what Titus thought when he got there. Can't imagine what it was like in some of those first few years and how long it would take before he would finally gain ground. But he would gain ground. He would just gain ground. He would build a church culture there so strong that when the first Roman persecution hit the Isle of Crete, they stood strong. The church did not waver. Wow, huge. There was one last major challenge in Crete. There's this huge theological challenge. In most of these diverse cities on the island Crete, there were dispersed Jews. And those dispersed Jews controlled certain things. Some of them controlled marketplaces. Some of them controlled places of teaching. Some of them had synagogues. There were gatherings. But they had gained influence. They weren't like scribes and Pharisees where they had law behind them like they did in Jerusalem. But they have significant influence. And they were greatly opposed to the idea that Christianity was taking a foothold throughout the world. And they were opposed to it. They were opposed to it in great ways. And during this time, well, once again, we go back to that first chapter, and in that first chapter where Paul is sending him, verse 10, it says this, these Cretans that you're going to have to work among, they are rebellious people, full of meaningless talk, deception, especially those of the circumcision group, that's the Jews. And they must be silenced because they're disrupting whole households by teaching things that ought not to be taught, and that for the sake of dishonest gain. The households of the Jews had notoriety because so many of them had been teachers, so many of them had been scribes, so many of them had been well educated. And so they began to teach, well, this is what you got to do in your household. And they were teaching all sorts of things that went against what Paul saw as being vital for establishing a solid Christian foothold there. So he says, you're going to have to take this on. You're going to have to take this on. Now, Titus didn't go to Bible college. Titus didn't go to seminary, and he doesn't have a doctorate. Titus was mentored by one man and continued to urge to take up more leadership. Titus has now been proven and true, and Titus is now accepting the challenge of going to Crete to see it changed. Wow. Wow. So we live in a culture today where it's, man, we are so far from being united as a culture today, it's unreal. We talk about all sorts of things where because I work at the jail, one of the requirements for me to work at the jail is I must honor the identity declaration of any inmate, no matter what it is. So, literally, whatever it is, if he declares to me he's a dog, I have to acknowledge that he's a dog. Okay, so you're a dog. Or whatever other strange thing they acknowledge along the way, anything concerning their race, their gender, where they're at. We live in a society where that's part of what we are. We live in a society now that we can be explosively angry at someone else just because we disagree with something that they said, to the point where now in our society there are people that take shots at other people because they disagree with them. So, one person speaking on college campuses, officers fulfilling their calling, others shooting at individuals in transport. It's just, man, I hate listening to the news. We're in this incredibly difficult cultural situation. And then I think about Northport. I think about Northport and what we're like, and we have pockets of people that, we're so diverse on Sunday morning. You drive up and down Biscayne, and you've got all those. You have churches that are holding on to their identity of the past because that's their identity. Well, I'm a Ukrainian church, or I'm a Russian church. You know what Paul said about that in Galatians, right? There is now no Jew nor Greek. There is no other identity except those who are near the cross and those far from the cross. The entire world summed up this way. You either know him or you don't. That's who we are. But we still divide ourselves by the color of our skin, by our background. We divide ourselves sometimes by what we've experienced. We divide ourselves by things like this. You can't understand what I've gone through, so therefore, I reject you. I was raised in a hurtful, vile home. You can't understand me, so I have not. This is the culture we live in. I believe that if Titus, one guy, can change the Isle of Crete, churches can change the cultures around them. How do we do it? Paul gives us 46 verses. And in those 46 verses, we will see things that we practice as a church and as people that put us in a position of influence in the culture around us. The culture around us. Someone who's really close to me shared this story with me. They had shared with someone, actually this person's wife had shared with someone who she voted for in the last presidential election. And the person that she was sharing that with was so offended by it, literally said, well, if I haven't known you for so long, I probably would just walk away from this friendship. But I have seen your sincerity, so let's at least talk about this. Our witness with Jesus is the most powerful thing that can bring us back together. The calling to love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. To love the other people around us as ourselves. We get a handle on what that looks like, and the book of Titus can help us. We become more effective in the world in which we live, and we have the opportunity to impact the culture around us. It's who we are. It's who we're called to be. If Titus could do it, and you're going to see it was a major challenge, but if Titus can do it, then those 46 verses, I can't believe just 46 verses. That's amazing. 15 verses on average per chapter. Wow. He put it in place, and it worked. It worked. It worked. I'm going to ask the worship team to come up. So what do? Here's what I want to challenge you to do. I want to challenge you to read Titus this week. 46 verses. You might be the worst reader in the room, but I'm guessing you can handle 46 verses. I really do. And I don't need you to understand it all. Matter of fact, you might read something and go, what's that? You might have the biggest question. Dave, you might have some big questions that you see there and that, and just circle it, underline it, and go see Joe. Hey, Joe. Hey, Joe, what does this mean? And force him. And actually, he's much better at doing that now and asking those questions that are going on. Because that's what we need to do. We need to look at it and ask those questions. What don't I understand? What do I understand? That's intriguing, and maybe talk about it. So maybe you're sitting next to your spouse, and you happen to read it, and then you turn to your spouse. Did you read this? Look what it says. Look what it says, and it spurs a conversation there. I really want to challenge you to pray about what God has for you. Read the book, and then I want to challenge you to take the journey. If Paul expected 46 verses could prepare a church to change a culture, there's got to be stuff in here for us. There's got to be stuff in here for us. If 46 verses was enough to change the Isle of Crete, to establish households and establish churches and strengthen families, if it was enough, there's got to be stuff in here for us. And so I want to challenge you to take the journey. I'd also love to challenge you to just simply invite another. A little bit, I'm going to pray, and worship team's going to sing a song. And I feel really burdened. I want to give people a chance. I know that some of you are going all through issues, challenges, struggles, difficulties. I want to give you a chance to, maybe you need to be prayed for today. Maybe you've got an issue that you would like, I don't know, just Pastor Joe to pray for, Archie's here, I'm here, somebody else. Just come forward and just say, I'm really worried about this, or I'm really struggling with this. And if that's you, come forward and let somebody pray for you today. We'd love to do that. So while we sing this song, just come forward for prayer. Would you stand with me? So Father God, I pray over us as a church. I pray over this book of Titus.